Good morning and welcome to our latest virtual roundtable brought to you by Bridging and Commercial and kindly sponsored by Mercantile Trust. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Beth Fisher. I am the Publishing Director at MediaNet Publishing, the online publisher for Bridging and Commercial and Development Finance Today, and also the bi-monthly print Bridging and Commercial magazine. Today, we will be discussing what opportunities will arise from the proposed EPC regulations. So first of all, let me set the scene. According to CBRE, over half of UK homes have an EPC rating of D or lower. And also due to their age, our drafty British homes have lose heat up to 3 times faster than those in Europe. So we have quite a bit of a problem on our hands. With residential buildings representing the lion's share of real estate emissions, the government has set deadlines for retrofitting, where landlords must ensure properties have an EPC rating of at least C for new tenancies by 2025 and by 2028 for existing ones. According to the government, it is estimated the average cost to landlords of making improvements to reach an EPC of C is just shy of £5,000. But many other reports and the fact that materials and labour costs are forever increasing, as we've all seen, these are pointing to a much larger bill. With price rises predicted to continue into next year, the task of upgrading our housing stock could be further out of sight. In recent months on Bridging and Commercial, we have published several reports citing significant numbers of property investors not aware of the minimum EPC changes. As they are still in proposal stage, I can't see this rapidly changing anytime soon. Stats from Landbay earlier this year found that most landlords said they would wait until 2025 to carry out necessary work around upgrading EPCs. Considering we have issues with supply chains and a labour shortage already, especially in a sustainable built environment, would it even be possible for landlords to get the works done by the deadline? I'm sure that's a question we will all want to answer today. Later, we will discuss what products are currently available for property investors to upgrade their EPC bands, and with scores of finance providers pulling and repricing their products in recent weeks due to market volatility, have green mortgages and specialist refurb loans been put on the backbench? Currently, EPC ratings are based on the cost of energy used and don't include the amount of carbon emissions. We will debate whether the EPC rating system needs to be improved or scrapped and replaced with something new. While the latter is unlikely to happen due to them increasingly being used as targets by the government, I am eager to know what enhancements our panel would like to see in order to help landlords, developers and homeowners retrofit, build and buy property in the UK with more certainty. Over the next hour, we will look at whether it's doable for landlords to reach these higher EPC ratings, how these targets are affecting the demand for bridging finance, and whether the cost of living crisis has got more property investors engaged or apathetic with the work that will be required. Join me to discuss their own experiences and chat through their thoughts are a fantastic group of experts in this particular space. So now I will hand over a couple of minutes each to them to introduce themselves, and I'd like to start with Maeve, please.
Morning, everybody. So I'm Maeve Ward, Commercial Director at Mercantile Trust. Obviously, this is a topical webinar that we're having today, and something that's dear to most lenders' heart, and certainly something that lenders and brokers akin are keeping a close eye on and trying to create as much awareness as possible sort of moving forward to make sure that property landlords are ready.
Thanks for that, Maeve. Sam?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Cantle. I'm the Technical Manager at Stroma Certification. We run a certification body for energy assessors. So when energy assessors lodge EPCs, they come through a body such as ourselves. We then monitor and audit a percentage of the reports that are lodged to make sure that there's quality assurance in the industry.
Thanks for that. Steve?
Good morning, thank you for that, Beth. Yeah, my name's Steve Sweeney. I'm the Commercial Director at Envelop Finance. We are a specialist packager specialising in all types of specialist lending, such as bridging, commercial development, buy-to-lets. My main role is looking after 110 current ARs on the network, because we also run a network. So there'll be a number of ARs out there that are in this market, and we'll be looking for some feedback around the EPCs and landlords and what they can do to assist their clients.
Thanks for that, Steve. And last but definitely not least, Helen.
Morning, hi, I'm Helen Score. I'm Operations Director, Pure Panel Management. We provide survey and valuation to around about 200 different broker and lender clients across the country. And more recently, we have sort of stepped into that EPC provision as well as the survey and valuation, which is two completely different entities. We've just sort of completed a project with one of our clients providing EPCs, which is why I've joined into this now, just to give a little bit of insight as to what happens, at the back end once that EPC's provided, and what options there are afterwards to try and get any of the works carried out.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Helen. Just a reminder to everyone in the audience that you can submit your questions throughout this hour discussion. You can do so on the control panel on the right of your screen using the chat function. So please do drop your questions in there, whether they're for the whole panel or direct to certain individuals, and I will do my best to get through as many of those as possible today. So first of all, let's kick off with kind of where we're at right now. So the EPC regulations are still at proposal stage. What impacts is this uncertainty around them currently having on landlords and property investors? Maeve, do you want to kick us off with that one in terms of what you're seeing from clients?
Yeah, I think firstly, probably to set the scene really, I think the brokers have done quite a good job so far in terms of educating where they've got a relationship with a property investor of what potentially is coming down the track, and discussing sort of finance options for them if they don't have the cash available or they don't want to use their cash available to start the upgrades now. I guess probably the biggest sort of challenge is people thinking, well, it is just at proposal stage, and should I do it now or should I wait? And Beth, you articulated that perfectly right at the very beginning of this session. You could wait, but then as we know, sort of the supply chain in terms of getting materials, and then the demand in terms of getting somebody to do the work, they may then find that if they leave it till the very last minute, that they potentially risk being hit with a fine because they've not been able to upgrade the property in time, and perhaps haven't got the equity that they thought that they had within their property portfolio to enable them to do it, or they've used the cash that they've set aside for something else. So at the moment, there is a lot of unknowns. The biggest thing really is the cost of doing the work, and everything you kind of read is sort of estimated at sort of 15,000, but that really depends on the age of the property and the type of property. So it's not set in stone that that's all it's going to be. So what I would probably suggest for many is to have a look at what their current EPC rating is across that portfolio, and then have a look at, okay, what would it take to move that to where it needs to be, because that particular cost and the level of work will be very, very different depending on the type of property and the age of property.
I guess this is becomes even more difficult with landlords who are, large portfolio owners as well, and they've got different properties of different ages.
Absolutely, and I think mid-terrace, I think, is one of the ones that will be hit the hardest, and sort of 1990s, I think. So there will obviously be some property landlords that decide not to do the work, and you may see that they're offloaded, but equally with that happening, there's always an element of opportunity, right? So somebody else that perhaps is in the trade that is looking to become a property landlord might actually look at buying their first investment property, doing the works themselves, and then holding that asset. So there is some opportunity with this as well, if that did determine some property landlords offloading some of their stock.
Steve, what are you seeing in terms of like your clients in terms of uncertainty or demand for upping their EPC ratings? Are you feeling that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market around this?
There is a fair degree of uncertainty because, as you say, it is still at proposal stage. A lot of our ARs are trying to encourage their clients to actually do something proactively now rather than wait to the very last minute. And as Maeve has just pointed out, our ARs are seeing an opportunity for different types of funding to raise the capital now whilst it's still available. And as we all know, interest rates and calculations for ICRs have risen quite dramatically. So the guys that had planned for this earlier on in the year are now slightly ahead of the game because they've locked into fixed rates previously, which may not be available now. But I do think there are opportunities for landlords, future landlords, I should say, with the larger landlords offloading some of their less profitable properties into the market at a slightly reduced price. This gives the new landlord an opportunity to buy something for inherent value at a later point in time. And we are seeing a number of like last-minute buy-to-let being sold at auction, which we're looking to finance, and our ARs are actually talking about EPCs at that point and what plans have they got and what monies have they got set aside.
It's interesting. I'm sure this will have quite a big impact on bridging finance, which we'll discuss a bit later down the line in terms of auctions and all these properties which might be put back on the market. I'm interested to know, there was a report to Parliament from the Climate Change Committee which found that energy efficiency retrofits are significantly off track. Sam, do you think it's doable for property investors to ensure their properties reach the C rating by 2025 for new tenancies and 2028 for existing agreements?
Yeah, I mean, I think the longer indecision goes on, the more difficult it gets, doesn't it? I do think it's probably unlikely. The proposal in the consultation to raise the cost cap to £10,000 per property from currently 3,500 means that there should be more investment going into each individual property, therefore giving that property a better chance of getting to the rating they want. The government predicts that 90% of D-rated properties using a £10,000 investment would get to C or above, and 60% of E-rated properties would get to C or above. We're not too sure what it means for F and G rated properties, and we know that there are a lot of them. I think the other point to make on this is that it's not just because a property didn't reach that rating wouldn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't be lettable or rentable. There is still going to be an exemptions register. It looks like that's going to remain largely unchanged. So once that investment has been made in the property, were it not to get the desired rating, it could still be let on the basis that the landlord had applied for an exemption and had it granted.
Do you think that landlords might be kind of relying on this exemption register?
Anecdotally, I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that the exemption register in the past has maybe been abused. There have been sort of workarounds that have been in place where you can get a signed statement from the tenant to say that they don't wish for an EPC to be carried out, or they're happy to proceed on the basis that it hasn't reached the desired rating. I do think they're trying to close that loophole or they've proposed that in the next set of regulations. So I'm hoping that will have a positive impact there.
Thanks, Sam. Helen, from your perspective, what trends are you seeing in terms of property investors and landlords getting their properties up to spec? Do you think it's doable?
I think at the moment it probably is more doable. It's interesting what Sam said about the spend cap, because I think that it's been quite an interesting one, that one, because obviously it's currently at the 3,500 mark. By 2026, that's going to move up to 10,000. So, landlords, would they possibly hold off for another couple of years and then go in for an exemption, round about 2025, and that's going to take that right up beyond to 2030, because it's a huge jump going from like 3,500 up to 10,000 with the cap set at that level. Because at the moment, like you said to begin with, Beth, it's around about £5,000 they're saying is the average to get to that C rating at the minute, and that's only if you're there or thereabouts on a D rating. So when we've been doing the CPC project, we've took a sample. Well, I've went through like a sample of them, and properties notoriously that's on a D rating. If you look at, because the EPC actually gives suggestions as to how you would get it and how much it would cost to get from that sort of D range to the C range. And it's mostly things like cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, things like that, that, maybe could be, below 3,500, because they're sort of putting those sort of ranges at about 1,500 mark for cavity wall insulation, 1,500 for loft insulation. So I think at the moment it could be doable, but are landlords just going to kind of hold off and wait until this, the spend cap's going to be raised and get in there at that 3,500 level? But it's unpredictable what's going to happen.
Yeah, and with costs rising left, right, and centre, it's difficult for landlords to invest this money right now. So, you make a really good point there, Helen. Steve, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about obviously if there are landlords that are offloading properties, then we will see more, in auctions. What trends are you seeing as a result of the proposals, and how could they affect demand in bridging finance?
I couldn't say that they were a direct result as to the regulations, but we are seeing a lot more properties being sold at auction. I was talking to a couple of guys earlier last week, and they're buying and flipping properties via auction because it seems to be the quickest turnaround for them. Whether those properties are coming onto the market as a direct result of regulation, I wouldn't like to say, but the trend appears to be, from what I can see, a number of properties coming on via auctions and not necessarily being sold traditionally through agents currently. The vast majority that we're seeing come via an auction rather than via traditional estate agencies.
And are these properties that you're seeing, are they the older kind of low EPC rated stock, or what kind of properties are you seeing?
They tend to be cheaper stock in areas which have a larger sort of university areas, where I think landlords are trying to purchase them, convert them, and at the same time looking to refurbish to a higher standard and make them more energy efficient. There was a couple of cases a few weeks ago where they'd specifically remortgaged their properties to carry out EPC work on a property that they'd already bought at auction, because they couldn't get the full financing for it, so they've had to raise cash in other ways to do the work.
Maybe you seeing kind of a rise in demand for bridging finance for this sort of, I guess, eventuality for properties being put back on the market?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen sort of an uplift in sort of refurbishment loans sort of per se. So whether they're actually purchasing a property that requires significant works doing to it, of which EPC falls within that, versus obviously people that are looking to release the equity to sort of get ahead of the curve and obviously upgrade their properties within their portfolio. So we definitely are seeing that at the moment. I suppose those people that are tied into sort of a preferential rate on their portfolio at the moment, or they're tied into an ERC, perhaps that's coming up to renewal. What they're looking to do is they're trying to make the improvements now so that perhaps they then could qualify when the works are done for the sort of greener mortgage range on the remortgage, where they would potentially get a preferential rate again. So we are definitely seeing that. Because we obviously offer buy-to-let second charges as well, it's kind of a split between whether or not they want to do it quickly and not have a monthly payment, and so they're using a bridging facility to do that, or whether they're looking to do it as a second charge term where they're obviously looking to service it. But equally, we are seeing some professionals coming where they are tied in, where they can't release the equity within their portfolio, where they are looking across to available equity within their main residence, and they are looking to do capital raising on their main residence via a sort of homeowner business loan to then go and do the necessary remedial work that's required on their portfolio. So I wouldn't say it's a direct correlation to sort of EPC. I think it's a mixture of people that are wanting to do refurbishments, that are looking at where the properties currently are, to Helen's point, assessing what would it actually cost me now to do that, because it won't always be such a big figure. Some it will just cost obviously £3,000. Some of them are looking at what do I need to do, how big is that jump, and how can I actually release the equity. So we are seeing it, but it's not necessarily just all about sort of improving EPCs for sure.
Sam, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's just a small point, really. I think that there's a perception with what's happening in this space that people are looking to shift away from sort of older properties and focus on newer properties, which are seen as better performing in terms of an EPC. And it's not always the case that there's a direct correlation between the age of the property and the EPC rating. Older properties aren't always worse. For example, you could have a sort of a mid-terrace 1900 properties. I know it's been mentioned already, but they tend to have very low heat loss perimeters. So the impact of putting in something like loft insulation, improving windows, upgrading boilers if they're old and inefficient, that can have quite a positive impact on the EPC rating.
Has the cost of living crisis got more property investors engaged with the work that will be required? That's a question for all of you.
I would definitely say yes. I think everyone's worried about the cost of living crisis, Beth, for sure. And definitely with tenants, I guess, when they're looking at the properties in which they are looking to rent, I do think a more energy efficient property would be advantageous to them, especially if they are the ones that are paying those bills. So I do think, whereas before it might not have been as much of a consideration, it definitely is becoming one, just as, the cost of living crisis is hurting everybody right now, and we're only really at the start of it. It is potentially only going to get worse.
We're definitely seeing, so obviously we run a certification scheme for energy assessors, so we're involved with stakeholders who want to question the validity of EPCs, and we're definitely seeing more and more complaints from people coming in about the EPCs that are on their properties. Now, that can mean one or two things really, but I think that the main takeaway from that is people have more of an interest in their EPC than they care more about it, and we're also seeing education levels increasing, and people do understand more now about what the EPC is and the information that is contained within it. So I think that's a positive thing. People are engaging more, and I think that can only be a good thing in the long run, really.
Helen, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree with Sam on that one. I think people need to be more educated on the EPC, full stop. I think I've seen some that come through. If you bought a brand new build property, what EPC rating would you expect it to have? You would expect to have A, wouldn't you? You would expect to have the top EPC rating, but it wouldn't. It would have a B unless it's got solar panels. It seems like the top energy ratings, unless you've got, solar heating, solar panels, this water and things like that, you're not going to get like this A rating. It's just, you just don't. But I just don't think people kind of are educated enough as to what, what it entails to get the rating up and what it's going to cost, because I think sometimes people just get frightened of the fact that it's going to cost, tens of thousands of pounds when, it might not be that much. So I do think there's a little bit, of naivety going on at the minute, that we're not, nobody's given people, the general public, enough information on what an EPC is and what it entails to get that rating higher than what they've got.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with Helen, actually, that I don't think there's enough information, detailed information about the EPC, what's required, and the best ways to go about it for the general public. You hear snippets of information, but I don't think there's enough detail that's been delivered to the general public so they know what to do and they know typical costs involved.
Do you think this is a good opportunity for brokers to really brush up on their knowledge on EPC so they can give their clients more information about this and more, opportunities and products that could help them refurb their properties?
Yeah, I agree to a certain something that might come in the future. The smart brokers will be looking at educating their landlords and educating their clients on what's required. But I think, again, going back to the original point that Helen made, I don't think there's enough information to give to brokers or individuals to tell them what's required.
I'm going to move on a bit more to policy gaps, and this is probably an area where, in terms of education, there should be more education from the top down, from government. But do you think there are policy gaps that need to be filled to ensure that the targets can be achieved? Sam, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, ultimately, I think our approach to this is there needs to be some more carrots out there for people. We have eco, but really I think there needs to be some more better considered funding methods to make these improvements doable. Ultimately we have very ambitious targets to hit as UK PLC, and at the moment all the evidence is pointing that we're gonna come up short of that. So first thing, I think it's good that this sector is being looked at, because we have to target all sectors to really make a notable improvement. And so we can't let entire segments of the property market go untouched. But I do think that unless there is more consideration given to various funding mechanisms, that ultimately we're going to see ourselves come up short.
Helen, do you think there are other policy gaps that need to be filled?
It's where are people expected to get the money from? The government are, although they're pushing for everything, they're pushing for all this greener, cleaner, carbon footprint, this, that, and the other. But at the minute, like you touched on right in the beginning, Beth, there's something like 60 to 70% of the homes in the UK are a D or below, and the bill for they're looking at the UK to upgrade all of those properties in the UK, it's looking around about 125 billion pound. So the average, where's that money going to come from? It's the cost of living crisis is already well underway, and like Maeve said, that's just going to escalate and get worse. And where's the average house owner or landlord expected to pull this money from? It's crazy. It's crazy to think that the government are, you feel like they're putting their foot down on these policies and things like that, and then they kind of go off the radar, and then they're back in the forefront of everything, and then on top of everything else that's going on, I'm really at a loss as to where people are expected to be finding the money.
Yeah, and it doesn't help with the revolving door we're seeing at the moment with politics, and with something in proposal stage, they can't really fill any policies until that's completely set in stone. So I completely get why we're seeing these reports at the moment that there is this hesitancy to do anything until until it's there. But there's also that strong, the compelling argument, which I think Maeve mentioned right at the beginning, that these prices are rising. We can't really wait until 2025 or whenever the milestones are, because if everyone is looking to do their refurbs at the same time, it's just not going to happen. It is something which everyone needs to move towards. But yeah, you make a really good point there, Helen. Where are people going to get their funding from for this? Which really, and I've heard it quite a few times, while it's not the responsibility of the specialist finance market, this is really where the specialist lending market plays a vital part, because they are the lenders and the brokers that really know how to come up with quirky solutions for things like this. So what products are currently available for investors right now? And where do you think there are opportunities are for kind of further product innovation? Steve, do you want to jump on that one first?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, specialist lenders are key players in this market. Although having said that, there's only so much that the lenders can do with the shortage of opportunities and funding opportunities that are available, with rental calculations going through the roof. I think there is a certain amount of responsibility from the landlord side, that money should have been put aside. But whether you can expect the lenders to come up with innovative products to sort the problem, I'm not entirely sure that with the funding gaps that we've got, whether that's possible. There's always opportunities to be raising money on your residential, but I'm not sure whether someone would want to raise money on their residential to plough into a buy-to-let, which may not be the most appropriate thing to do at this moment in time. I don't know if Maeve, from a lender's perspective, has got any comments on that, but
yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Steve. I think, the sort of specialist market collectively, brokers and lenders will certainly, I would say, lead the way here. I think one of the things that you just mentioned there about what is the right thing to do, I think, if you've got property professionals that aren't engaged with the broker, probably now is the right time to do that, because it's about understanding how their portfolio looks right now. And to Helen's point as well, in terms of that sort of education piece, it's about just understanding here and now, what does your portfolio look like in this landscape? Where are you sitting with the stock that you have from an EPC perspective? And then educating people on where they can go in terms of understanding what does that bill look like for them, and then having a conversation with a specialist broker to say, what options are available to me, what lenders are there. And there are lots of lenders out there, and it is just refurbishments. Let's put this into perspective. An EPC upgrade is refurbishments in the eyes of a lender. It's about taking a property from where it is now, investing money into it to actually bring that EPC rating up. I think it will come down to which product you use, depending on the timing in which a landlord decides to do it. So if they leave it until the 11th hour and the funding isn't available elsewhere, and they haven't made it onto the exemption list as an example, and they need to transact quickly, then bridging finance is obviously a logical fit for that, because they need to move quickly. If they've got more time on their hands, and if rental coverage is not an issue, then potentially they can look to do more of a term product, be that a first or a second charge term, depending on how that portfolio looks and whether or not it is the right outcome to refinance that, pay an ERC as an example, or whether or not a second charge is better. And then if you explore all of those options, then there is a third option from other lenders out there. And I do take your point, Steve, some will not want to use their main residence at all, but it is an option per se if they haven't got the equity within their portfolio, if they can't make the rental coverage within their portfolio, but they have got significant equity within their main residence, then absolutely. But it all comes down to, what is it you need to do now? What is your ultimate game in the future? And what is the right customer outcome? And that really is where a specialist broker can come into their own and help educate and assist that property professional make the right decision for them.
I fully agree with that, Beth. I mean, there will always be, sorry, Maeve, there will always be opportunities within the specialist market. And I think this is probably more relevant to the larger landlords that are holding, significant numbers of properties, rather than the smaller landlord, because there's always ways in which, yes, we could look at bridging, we could look at term loans, we could look at second charges to fund those improvements. When you've got landlords that's got 40, 50 properties, and they're all highly geared because every 3 or 4 years they're taking out money to buy new property, so the gearing is quite high, might be a slightly more tricky situation. But there's always ways, if you think outside the box within the specialist lending market, there will always be ways to raise additional funds.
Sam, do you see any other opportunities in this space and that brokers, lenders, and investors can look at?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take the first half of that's all right, Beth, which is in relation to products that are currently available for property investors to upgrade their EPC bands. And I think the one point which hasn't really been mentioned at the moment is, in my opinion, the number one product to have is an up-to-date EPC. If you have an EPC which is not up to date, then you're making decisions based on out-of-date information. You wouldn't look to replace parts on your car without an up-to-date MOT, and this is kind of the same principle. The other thing on that is that the methodology on which EPCs are based gets periodically updated. The standards increase and overall ratings reduce over time, so properties which haven't been changed over a period of time will gradually receive worse and worse EPC ratings. But if you have an up-to-date EPC, then you should have recommendations listed which will provide useful information on where you can make improvements and where you can reduce your energy costs. The areas to focus on, in my opinion, is fabric first. So you need to get the fabric improved, then you need to make it airtight and insulated. You also need to consider ventilation in order to make sure that those alterations that have been made don't lead to unintended consequences or reduced quality of air. And then the final point is there is something within EPC methodology called Appendix Q, and this allows for innovative products which currently can't be accounted for within the EPC methodology to be able to be accounted for and see or recognized, should we say, within the EPC calculation, and therefore improve the EPC rating. There are a couple that are out there at the moment that have been listed in Appendix Q. Once a technology is within Appendix Q, we then find that gets built into future releases of the methodology, so it becomes an available selection. So I think those are the things that people can have a look at. Appendix Q particularly interesting if you're right on the boundary. It can often make a couple of SAT points difference, which may just tip you into the EPC banding you're looking for, and not actually have to invest as much money as people may think.
Thanks for that, Sam. Just following on from what you were saying earlier, Maeve, with different products as a result of the changes and the proposals. As a bridging lender, are you changing criteria, appetite to risk, and your loan book exposure as a result of the kind of impending EPC changes?
We haven't made any changes as yet. Beth, we're still very much sort of having a look at those and sort of designing what that might look like sort of from 2023 onwards. One of the things we are doing at the moment, though, is we are actively engaging with our existing customers who perhaps fall into the sort of E and below, obviously, in terms of their current rating, and sort of writing out to those in terms of finding out what their intentions are sort of moving forward. But we haven't built anything firm that we're going to release to market yet, but it's certainly something that's at the forefront of our mind.
We'll definitely be looking forward to hearing what you come out with on that side. Steve, what are you seeing in terms of bridging lenders that you work with? Are you feeling that there is some kind of hesitancy in terms of loan book exposure for any of the lower EPC rated properties?
We haven't seen too many changes recently. It's relatively stable at the moment. I think there's a fair degree of uncertainty as to what's going to happen with markets and rates, and wherever possible, I think the bridging lenders are doing a fairly sterling job, just holding their nerve, and just keeping everything as normal as it can be currently. We've not seen many bridging lenders, stopping funding or increasing rates, or increasing and decreasing loan to values currently, which bodes well. I have to say that it bodes well for brokers and the general population, that things are relatively steady in the bridging market.
I mean, that is definitely good news. I think I guess the worry that's at the back of people's minds are whether or not this would be an influx of changes all quite suddenly towards those deadlines. Do you agree?
It's a difficult question, that, because how long do you put off changing things? I think generally speaking, there will be changes to the bridging market and to the market generally when you're talking about EPCs. But I think most people will look at it from a relatively sensible point of view and not do everything at the very last minute, and make gradual changes over a period of time once information has become readily available and we know exactly what's what.
Helen, are you seeing a kind of shift in appetite to risk from bridging lenders?
We do quite a lot of bridging work, and it is becoming more and more popular. We do quite a bit with Maeve and some other lenders. As for the bridging market with EPCs and things like that, it is obviously an option for people to be able to fund the upgrades. But again, we have to go back to what that is costing, the average person. I've been working quite closely with an EPC provider at the minute, and they've heard rumours that some lenders are going to start offering some sort of like green further advance on mortgages and things like that. But again, like Maeve would know, you would have to be at the right level of LTV to be able to release that sort of money. So then do we go back to bridging? I don't know. I really don't know. It just goes round in circles really, and back to the fact that people have got to find this money from somewhere.
We have an article in the latest issue of the B&C magazine all about EPCs, whether or not they are still fit for purpose. And Sam, I know you went into a bit of depth earlier about how they calculate, and also the data needs to be updated constantly as well. So do you agree that they are still fit for purpose, and is there an alternative?
Was that to me? Sorry, Beth.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. So there's quite a lot here, I think. The first thing I'd say is that the EPC is just an output. It's just a graphical view of a few select data points taken out of what is actually a very complex calculation. So, and I think that's something which people often misinterpret or don't have a full understanding of. My point there is that the EPC could actually be very easily changed and updated based on all the information that currently sits within the calculation. I think the real question is maybe whether or not the calculation is fit for purpose, because ultimately I think that's what people often have issues with. Originally, the EPC was brought in to give a perspective by an asset rating of a property. So it doesn't account for how somebody actually uses that property, or give actual energy usage figures. And I think that's often something which we see causes issues, because people look at an EPC and say, well, my bills don't represent that figure at all. And it's a valid point. They don't, and then they never will do. It's never what they were intended for. But obviously, we've seen that the EPC is being used for more and more things now. And so the question is whether it needs to be updated. And I think this comes back to ownership of the EPC. The EPC is owned by DLUC, but this MEES policy, which is sort of prompting the conversation today, is a policy driven by BEIS, so different government departments, and it does mean that we can see that changes are or have been in the past quite slow to make. So I think the government and all departments with a vetted interest in the EPC need to be working together to make sure that the methodology that sits behind it is suitably updated to provide industry with a certificate that works. That is beginning to happen. We've seen it most recently with SAP around the release of the new building regulations, something that we've been waiting for ages. The last time that happened was in 2014, so we've been waiting a hell of a long time for that, but it's finally in place. And that will roll down into RDSAP, which will be we'll see in domestic existing build EPCs hopefully next year.
That's really helpful. Thanks for that, Sam. Helen, do you think that the EPC system is still fit for purpose?
Yes, I do. There's been a lot of there's a lot of talk. Sam, you'll know this. Like, the EPC, is the EPC just some sort of blunt instrument? No, I don't think it is. And what is the alternative to it? Are we going to go down the road of getting some more expensive assessment? And where will that cost? The burden of that cost is going to fall back onto the homeowner yet again. So I think the EPC as it is at the moment, for cost and the relative ease of getting one carried out, I cannot see that there's another product or anything else out there that is going to supersede the EPC as it is.
Thanks, Helen. I think we lost Maeve there, but I believe she's still in, so just off camera at the moment. So hopefully we'll see her in a second. Steve, do you have anything to add on this in terms? Oh, there you go. Steve, do you have anything to add in terms of the EPC system? Do you think it should be completely shaken up and reformed, or do you think it's still fit for purpose?
To be absolutely honest, I think Sam gave us quite a detailed overview of what was required. And to be fair, I'm not too ginned up on the ins and outs and the technicalities of the EPC. But you mentioned earlier, Beth, that it doesn't take into account of any CO2 emissions, and if we're looking at a greener environment and greener properties, I think it would need to take into account the CO2, because you could have an EPC rating of B or a C, but have a 40-year-old boiler that is particularly inefficient and churns out tons and tons of carbon dioxide. So I think the CO2 ratings ought to be included within the EPCs at some point, when everything is finalised. I don't know whether Sam would agree with that.
Yeah, we actually used to have it on the EPC to some extent. We had something called the environmental impact rating, and that was, I think it was around September of last year, we moved to a new EPC register owned by the government, or ran solely by the government, and at the same time we did away with the old EPC format of a sort of a printable PDF and replaced it with an online link of what the certificate now is. So it used to be there, and the calculation still holds that information and could very easily be brought back.
I've got a few questions from the audience, so I'd like to ask them now, just in our last 10 minutes or so. And this is for the whole panel. And I think, I can't remember who exactly said it, but they were talking about how obviously with you need a new MOT, for example. It's the same with the EPC, you need to update that regularly. But how can landlords avoid making changes to properties now that won't have the desired long-term results? I don't know if that's one that's better for you, Sam. So yeah, how can landlords avoid making changes to properties now that won't have the desired long-term results? So I assume that's based on changes that might not make a bigger effect longer down the road.
That's a really difficult one to answer because we don't fully know what the changes will be in future releases of the methodology. One thing we do know is that the fuel costs that sit within the calculation for the EPC are static. They don't change over time. The current version is also, I should say, it's based on a 3-year average of what fuel costs were. So any EPC that is being calculated even today doesn't affect the current state of play with fuel costs. So it is a concern because that could very easily in 3 or 4 years time that could feed through, and it can alter the impact of what an EPC rating is. So it's a challenge, and I don't really have a particularly good suggestion for that one, to be honest with you. The only thing I would say is that you can only go off what it is today. So if you get an EPC today, it's valid for 10 years. It's really what happens after that point, or if validity periods change from the government. I think we'd need to worry about that a little bit more.
Thanks for that, Sam. Another question is, do you think that landlords are potentially holding out until base rates are more stable before borrowing money to do these refurbishments? Maeve, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the level of uncertainty around sort of rates in the market right now are definitely making borrowers, landlords or not, take stock and just think, I'm going to wait and see what happens before I sort of increase my borrowing, really. I do think sort of uncertainty is driving some hesitance. I guess we do have some time, sort of 2025 is not upon us yet. So do they have to act immediately? Probably not, but I do think there is an element of that for sure, where the uncertainty is making people think, do I do it now or do I hold out a little bit longer?
I have another question here. Do you think the government should allow underlying data for an EPC to be shared with property owners so they can use third-party services to shape their own improvements?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one a little bit. To some extent, they already do. There is freely available data on properties on the Open Communities website. There's currently around about 20 million EPCs which appear on that, and that information gets updated on a quarterly basis. We have also gone around this loop with government. We believe that government see EPC data as their data, not as anyone else's data, not as the person who's collected it, the energy assessor on site, not the company who the assessor works for, and not the homeowner. That's the current position. We have been pushing on that for quite a while. Ultimately, for the whole sector to work together well, people need to be able to share data, and we don't see any reason why we shouldn't be doing that. But it's a government decision, and it's one that they are, I believe, taken away to work on.
Thanks, Sam. That's really interesting, and hopefully that information can be better used by property investors themselves. We've got a few more minutes before I'm going to close the discussion. So I think this would be perfect timing for everyone to give any kind of final statements, final remarks on this subject, anything which they feel that they didn't cover in the hour. Maeve, do you want to start us off, and then we'll just go around each person?
There isn't really anything else that I would add. I mean, sort of certainly listening to the sort of other experts on this roundtable today, for me, it's very clear that it's understanding, to Sam's point, your current position, have a look at what your current EPC certificate actually says about your property or properties, and then get engaged with a specialist broker in terms of sort of reaching out to the likes of Steve as an example and just discussing your options. You don't have to act today, obviously, but understanding your options can enable you to make better formed decisions moving forward. But to have no plan, in my opinion, is a risk.
Thanks, Maeve. Helen, what kind of helpful pointers would you offer the audience today?
I would say that people need to be looking into it, getting more information on what an EPC is, what effect it's going to have long term. Landlords, obviously, they're the ones that are under the cosh at the moment with it, but this is going to, there's nothing to say that normal household, Joe Bloggs who owns their own home, but eventually, that it's going to come on to that as well, because the government want this, the carbon footprint, eliminated, and its households are responsible apparently for 22% of, the emissions at the moment. So it isn't going to go away. It can be sort of backed off a little bit with all these different legislations coming in at different years, but I would say that people need to be more educated. There needs to be more education out there for them in the first instance, but it does need to be looked at, and people need to be taken seriously.
Thanks, Helen. Steve, do you have any final comments to make?
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I think the key here is that brokers need to be educated within the EPC regulations, and passing that information on to their clients and their landlords in a way that the advice that they're providing is up to date, is clear, and would be able to help and assist guiding their clients, landlords, through that maze of products to make sure that they get the right advice.
Thanks, Steve. And Sam, any final comments?
Yeah, just building upon both what Maeve and Steve have said there. Make sure you're familiar with what your EPC is saying. Make sure that you've looked at when that EPC was lodged, crucially, and when it expires, and make sure that it's up to date. So consider getting a new one if the dates don't align really with sort of current times. And I think the other thing I would say is, and it's a hotly debated topic around the sort of whether the EPC is fit for purpose. I think, as well as recognizing the fact that what we have up until now has done a reasonably good job, I think we should also bear in mind, and government should bear in mind, that the EPC and what it was originally brought in to do is now being used much wider, and therefore it needs to be reviewed and see what areas can be made to improve it.
Thanks so much for that, Sam. We are 2 minutes to 12, so I will need to kindly bring the event to a close. I just want to thank Mercantile Trust for partnering with us on this, and thank you to our fantastic expert panel for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us this morning. We will be publishing this roundtable in full next week on B&C for those who weren't able to make today's live event, or for anyone who just wanted to repeat some of the answers that were discussed today. If you enjoyed this panel discussion, please do check out our virtual roundtable calendar on B&C and DFT, which we have a few more for the rest of this year. And if you want to read the next issue of the B&C magazine, which focuses entirely on ESG, and it has a lot of features around EPC, retrofitting and flood risk, please do check it out online. I've put the link in the chat box for you all. But apart from that, have a fantastic afternoon, and we hope to see more of you in person soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.